So thank you to everybody who has joined us today. I realize it's a holiday weekend and you have lots of choices these days on where you go to get spiritually fed. So I'm delighted you came to hang out with us today. So today, or this weekend, is Memorial Day weekend, and it was originally known as Decoration Day. And it began shortly after the Civil War to honor those who perished in that conflict. And originally, the graves of the fallen soldiers were decorated with flowers. The earliest commemoration of this day was just 1 month after the Confederacy surrendered at the conclusion of the Civil War in 1865 by a group of formerly enslaved people in South Carolina. The town of Waterloo, New York, is considered the official birthplace of Decoration Day. In early May in 1866, they began a community-wide event, and the businesses closed and the graves of fallen soldiers were decorated with flowers and flags. And later this weekend, and maybe already, it's become a weekend that families gather together for the purpose of remembering and visiting the graveyards of their family members, their ancestors, with the intention of tidying up the graveyards and planting flowers and flags where appropriate on the graves. Some families still make a practice of doing this. It's also a huge weekend of family reunions and reconnection. And I just learned 2 days ago that a good portion of my father's family is gathering this weekend back in Western Virginia. And I'm sure one of the things on their agenda will be to visit the cemetery and just make sure that everything's okay there. I'm really grateful to Facebook because I can participate from a distance and be aware of this connection that exists, even if I'm here and they're there. And to be aware of and be reminded of the rituals and the informal ceremonies and the food, you know there's food, and the storytelling that's bound to occur. As Dr. Holmes wrote in today's spiritual thought that Shelley read earlier, memories are not dead things. They are always active. And they are always active in us. We have the opportunity to recognize that they're active in us and become ever more conscious about how we are choosing to be affected by memories and the stories that they carry. When I was thinking about today's talk this morning, I was remembering a conversation between Yogananda and one of his teachers. And he'd been, meditating and studying and stuff. And he went up to his teacher and he said, "Teacher, person, I don't think astrology has any control over me." And the teacher said, "Very good, Yogananda. It doesn't when you're awake. But when you're not awake, when we're not aware and conscious and paying attention, these memories, this story, this history, this what everybody believes is true does affect us. So we have to be conscious and aware and attentive to memories, our own memories and the collective memories, and decide whether or not we wish to be at the effect of them. It's a conscious decision on our part, and it's required if we don't want to fall into the hole where everybody is affected by their history. So there's an Italian psychotherapist and philosopher by the name of Piero Ferrucci who wrote a book called What We May Be. And in that book, he has a little quote that I'm going to use here. "Our mind is comparable to the square of a big town. It contains all sorts of thoughts and images and concerns and memories and expectations in a confused world. And here's the key: by giving sole admittance to the thoughts concerning one subject, we create a qualified environment, which is to say, an environment where we have some mastery, some focus, some possibility of creating a particular desired effect. This is not in any way different from Dr. Holmes reminding us in this thing called you. You are a creator, not a creature. Though you may be suffering from the effects of race consciousness, which I prefer to call collective consciousness or collective unconscious or default thinking, or what everybody says. We suffer from the effects of asleepness, but we have the opportunity to change our beliefs. We have the opportunity to change what we focus on and how we experience our lives. Raymond Charles Barker, who was a colleague and friend of Ernest Holmes and was the founding minister of the First Church of Religious Science in New York City, wrote in a little thin book called Treat Yourself to Life. On page 112, psychologists have told us that we are victims of the past, that what happens in your first 6 years conditions you, that experiences during those 6 years determine your drives, your motives, and the way you direct your life. The psychologists are perfectly right in what they say, but I do not believe the individual is explained in terms of their past, whether it be in terms of evolution, anthropology, or psychology. I believe you can only be explained in terms of your future. You can become something, and your capacity to become is not dependent on what you have been. It is dependent on what you are, and you can improve on what you are. Another friend and colleague of Ernest Holmes, who worked with him as the assistant dean at the Science of Mind Institute in Los Angeles, this is before religious science became a church, when it was still an educational institute. The man's name was Frederick Bales. Frederick was the assistant dean at the school, and he gave weekly lectures to capacity crowds in large auditoriums in Los Angeles. When Frederick was a young man, he had been given a death sentence, less than 18 months to live, by the medical profession at the time, because in 1915, when he was still a young man, if you got diabetes, you were screwed. Insulin hadn't been discovered yet. The doctors didn't understand how all of it worked. They just knew that if you had diabetes, you were dead. He was studying to be a medical missionary for a traditional Christian church, was diagnosed with diabetes, and he was really confused because he didn't understand how a person who had given their life to the service of God could get diabetes. Fair question, right? Well, he stumbles into a book by our friend Thomas Troward. This book is called The Creative Process and the Individual. Reading Troward's words changed his life and changed his ministry. He managed his diabetes by managing his thought, and he probably also managed his diet and lifestyle choices, because they do go together. You don't just manage your thought without changing your life. It's a complete package. But he did this, and the diabetes was managed, but it wasn't completely eradicated. So 6 years later, he's still puzzling why he's got this thing called diabetes. And it was under control, but it wasn't quite gone. And then he realized that he had some kind of hidden master thought in his mind that kept him having this experience called diabetes. And he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if he could do away with this thought, race thinking, if you get diabetes, you're going to die. If you get diabetes, you are at the effect of this thing called, in insulin dependence, which didn't exist yet. But he knew that he had the power to come up with a different experience. He had a way, if he could master his thinking, that he could overcome his experience of imperfection. And he wrote about how he removed that thought in an old book of his called Hidden Power for Human Problems. Here's what he wrote. One evening, I sat with my elbows on the desk, my head in my hands, and my eyes closed. Then I started, quietly and confidently, to declare, whatever is blocking my complete recovery must be some hidden strand of thought that holds some mental reservation. I'm not aware of its nature, where it started, or what keeps it active. But it must be mine, whether I can trace my way to it or not. I do not want it to keep operating. Therefore, I now declare that it is a vestige of my former destructive thinking. I emphatically state that it is completely out of line with the infinite thinker's thoughts, which are trying to manifest perfectly through me. It is a squatter living on territory that it has no rights to, not of any sort, and I call in the law to evict it, to fight it, to dissolve it, to negate it right now. I wash my hands of it. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to pay any attention to it. It is nothing trying to be something. It is no more real than the boogeyman that scared me as a boy. I turn every last thread of my thought to the contemplation of God in me through every single cell of my body. And he keeps going on the same train of thought, recognizing the beauty and the perfection and the power of God until he believed it in his bones, until he believed it in his pancreas. And he had a felt experience of how deeply he believed it. The next day, he went to the doctor and had his sugar tested again, and it came back negative. The problem never reappeared. He had removed that hidden thought, memory, belief, whatever it was, and the results of it manifested in his physical experience. We have that ability. We have to use the tools we have and the ability we have to decide whether we are affected by our memories, by our history, by what everybody says or not. And as I said last week, we believe that if we can't walk on water, we take boats. So if we need a boat until we're to the place where we can really grasp this idea of perfection in us, we use all the tools available. So Dr. Holmes and Dr. Bales wrote together in a different book, Life is a Blackboard before which we stand and write the words that govern us. We hold the chalk in one hand and the eraser in the other hand. The blackboard allows us to either use the chalk or the eraser, according to our power of will or choice. If we have made scrawling incorrect marks on the blackboard, we need not condemn ourselves or go through life bemoaning their presence. We don't have to keep paying for the mistakes of yesterday. The important thing is that hand holding the eraser must do the erasing. So there's a story told by Piero Ferrucci in that book, What We May Be. And I thought it was a really good story, so I'll tell it. After years of searching, the seeker was told to go to a cave where he would find a well. Ask the well what is truth, and the well will reveal it to you. Well, he went to the cave, he found the well, and the seeker asked the most fundamental question, what is truth? And from the depths of the well came the answer, Go to the village crossroads. There you will find what you are seeking. So he's really excited and hopeful. And he runs to the crossroads only to find 3 very uninteresting shops. One shop was selling pieces of metal, another selling pieces of wood, and a third selling wires. Nothing seemed to have anything to do with this revelation of truth. Disappointed, he went back to the well and demanded an explanation. He was only told, "You will understand in the future." He was indignant. He felt like he'd been made a fool of, so he left in a huff, and he kept searching for the truth. As the years went by, he forgot all about the well and the crossroads and the 3 shops and all that. And one night, while he was walking in the moonlight, he heard distant music being played. The music was beautiful, wonderful, played with mastery and inspiration. Profoundly moved by the music, he was drawn to find the musician. He found him. He watched the fingers dancing over the strings. He became aware of the sitar itself. In a flash of insight, he remembered those 3 shops. A sitar was made of wires, bits of metal, and bits of wood, just like he'd seen in those stores. He'd mistakenly thought they were of no significance at all. Put together, he was able to see. His eyes were opened and he could see this new truth. And then a quote, "At last he understood the message of the well. We have already been given everything we need. Our task is to assemble it and use it in the most appropriate way. Nothing is meaningful as long as we perceive it only as separate fragments. But as soon as the fragments come together into a synthesis, a new entity emerges. We have the authority and the responsibility to do this with our memories and with the stories we tell ourselves about them. They can be disjointed and have no meaning, or they can lead us down a garden path, or we can hold them in our minds as stories and memories and create a framework that allows us to move forward in an empowered, enlivened way. We already have everything we need. We just need to see it." So I want to close with a familiar poem by Rumi, translation, or called The Guest House, translation by Coleman Barks. And when I was thinking about this yesterday, it came back to me. This is yet another way to look at our memories. So I had to go find the poem so I could use it today. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes in as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Remember your authority, your agency, your opportunity, and your responsibility to see your memories with clear eyes and to use them in the way that serves your present and future self. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to go ahead and do the prayer. So if some of those words spoke to you, take some nugget that moves you forward in the direction you wish to go while I speak these words. I breathe into this space of community. I remember that experience of oneness and wholeness. I know that the infinite radiance lives in me, as me, through me, and also in, as, through, and by each individual here. I know that each has the opportunity at every instant to decide what story to tell to themselves and to their world at large, because each has been given as a guide from the beyond for our use, for our awakening, for our expansion and enjoyment, for our enlightening and enlivening. And so I remember when I find myself pulled off track by pieces of history, pieces of story, pieces of garbage thinking, that I can take them and see them clearly and use them for my future growth, for my expansion. And I know that same truth for and about each beloved here. So I bless this gathering. I bless each one who has participated in today's activities. And I know each moves into this weekend of remembrance and celebration, seeing their lives more clearly and their way marked more brightly. In great delight and joy, I relax into this great goodness and I let it be. And so it is.